The look on Brenda's face when I told her she was trespassing on my private lake, God, I'll never forget it. Her pontoon boat drifted to a stop, the motor sputtering out as she went pale, clutching her clipboard like a shield. Dozens of neighbors watched from the shore, while the self-proclaimed HOA queen realized she'd been barking orders at the man who actually owned the entire lake she'd been managing. But let me back up a little. 6 months earlier, I was just another burnt-out engineer in Phoenix, newly divorced, working too many hours and sleeping too little. Then my grandfather passed away and left me his estate in Millbrook, Wisconsin, a quiet lakefront property where I'd spent every childhood summer. The place smelled like pine grilled fish and memories. I thought moving there would be peaceful. I thought wrong. Enter Brenda Hutchinson, 52, always in tennis whites, even though I never saw her near a racket. She drove a white BMW SUV with Community First vanity plates and called herself president of the Millbrook Shores HOA. I didn't think much of it until she showed up one morning, clipboard in hand, perfume sharp enough to peel paint, and said, "We need to discuss your grandfather's informal arrangements with the community." She handed me a 47-page lake use agreement requiring $12,000 a year in maintenance fees. "Your grandfather was very cooperative," she purred. "I'm sure you'll want to continue that tradition." Something about the way she said outsider when referring to me, it hit wrong. I told her politely I'd review the papers first. Her smile could have frozen the lake in July. A week later, I threw a barbecue for some old college friends. Just burgers, music, good weather, nothing wild. Around 2 o'clock, Brenda stormed down my dock like she was leading a SWAT raid. "Sir, this community has standards," she snapped, demanding a guest list like she was Border Patrol. My friends went silent. The smell of charcoal and awkward tension hung in the air until everyone quietly packed up. That night, sitting alone on the porch, I felt like I'd failed my grandfather. He'd always opened his land to everyone. No rules, no fees. Maybe I really was the problem now. Maybe I didn't understand small-town traditions anymore. I almost convinced myself Brenda was right until I started digging through Grandpa's old study. Behind a bookshelf, I found a hidden compartment. Inside, brittle paper, old survey maps, and a notarized document from 1923 Crystal Lake Water Rights Grant. It named my grandfather's family as the exclusive owners of the entire lake. I laughed out loud. Brenda wasn't enforcing community standards, she was squatting on private property and charging rent for it. The next morning, there was a letter tucked under my windshield wiper. "Cease and desist unauthorized lake use, subject to $500 daily fines." It looked official until I noticed the law firm used a P.O. box, and the address matched the one Brenda listed on her HOA flyers. That's when things stopped being funny. I started talking to neighbors Dorothy, who'd lived there since the 70s, and Jim, a retired teacher. Dorothy's kitchen smelled like cinnamon and righteous anger. "Your grandpa never charged nobody a dime," she said. Then this woman shows up talking about proper management. Jim added the bombshell Brenda had been collecting $200 monthly lake fees from 20-plus families for years. I drove straight to the county courthouse. The clerk, Sandra, pulled up records faster than I could blink. No HOA ever registered. Brenda's property deed listed 0 shoreline. Grandpa's survey showed full private ownership down to the water line. The evidence was airtight. Monday morning, I found a sheriff's deputy waiting at my door. "Sir, we've had a complaint," he said, flipping open his notepad. "Harassment and property destruction." I laughed, showed him the deeds, and said, "Deputy, the only thing I've destroyed is Brenda's fantasy." 10 minutes later, he was shaking his head, muttering, "Well, I'll be damned." We drove over to her place. She was watering petunias, still dressed like she was auditioning for a tennis magazine. The deputy said, "Ma'am, seems there's some confusion about who owns what." The hose slipped from her hand, water splashing at her feet. "There must be some mistake," she stammered. I told her gently, "My family's been sharing this lake for generations, but sharing isn't the same as stealing." Word spread fast. 3 families stopped paying Brenda's fees the next day, but she wasn't done. Within a week, she'd plastered the neighborhood with flyers announcing a community meeting on waterfront access. Everyone got one except me. Apparently, Brenda was telling people I planned to fence off the entire shoreline and charge admission. Kids started asking if I'd banned swimming. That's when it got personal. An 8-year-old girl tugged my sleeve at the grocery store and whispered, "Are you really taking our lake away?" I knew then Brenda wasn't just power-hungry, she was manipulative. I checked with the township office, no meeting permit, no registered HOA, no insurance. The clerk said, if she's collecting money, you might want to call the state attorney general. That night I decided I was done being polite. I crashed Brenda's meeting. 40 people squeezed into the community center, coffee and donuts on folding tables. Brenda stood at the front giving a PowerPoint lecture about safety concerns and declining property values. I waited until she finished her fear-mongering. "Mrs. Hutchinson," I said loudly, "could you explain which legal authority granted you lake management rights? You could have heard a pin drop." Her face went through every color in the rainbow. "Well, your grandfather's verbal agreement," she started, but I cut her off and passed copies of my deeds down the rows. Murmurs rose like thunder. Someone shouted, "Wait, we own part of the shoreline, too." Brenda panicked and blurted, "I've already deposited $8,200 in the community maintenance account." That was her fatal mistake. People demanded to know where their money went. She grabbed her laptop and bolted out the back door. The next day, I found survey stakes around my property labeled pending development. Brenda had filed an application for a community recreation facility. Boat launches, cabins, parking lots on my land. I hired an attorney, Rebecca Storm, who specialized in HOA fraud. She reviewed everything and said, "This isn't just petty harassment. This is organized fraud." A week later, I discovered the ace up my sleeve. Inside my grandfather's cedar chest were documents from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Turns out the lake was federally protected as a watershed, with my grandfather serving as the official steward. I'd inherited not just property, but a trust worth over $300,000 to preserve it. Any development on that shoreline violated multiple federal laws. Brenda's project wasn't just illegal, it was a felony. Rebecca smiled when I told her. "Perfect," she said. "Let her keep digging. The feds will handle the rest." So we set the trap. I announced a free community festival for July 4th, funded by the Trust Boat Rides, kids' fishing lessons, educational booths. The community rallied. Brenda must have thought I'd given up because she suddenly showed up at my door trying to negotiate. My phone was recording the whole time. "Look," she said, fidgeting with her bracelet. "You can't fight the whole neighborhood forever. Why not make money instead of enemies? 30% of management fees, no hassle." Then she added, "The development plans. Just leverage. 20 minutes of pure bribery recorded in HD. That weekend, the EPA opened an investigation into unauthorized development at Crystal Lake. Monday morning, the FBI joined in for wire fraud and forged documents. I barely had to lift a finger. July 4th arrived hot and perfect. Over 200 people showed up. Kids splashed in the water, the jazz band played, and the smell of grilled corn filled the air. For the first time, the lake felt alive again. And right at 2:30, like clockwork, Brenda marched across the crowd, clipboard in hand, 3 loyal followers trailing behind her. "This illegal gathering needs to end immediately," she barked, voice sharp enough to cut glass. Conversations died. I stepped forward, calm, smiling. "Mrs. Hutchinson, so glad you could make it." "Beautiful day, isn't it?" She demanded to see my permits. I handed her a thick folder, township approvals, insurance, EPA documentation. "Now," I said softly, "could you show us yours?" Brenda held up a laminated badge, Community Safety Inspector. The crowd leaned in. Phones came out. I walked to the mic. "Folks, Mrs. Hutchinson has some questions about authority. Let's clarify who actually owns Crystal Lake." Behind me, the big screen flickered on, showing the 1923 deeds, the EPA trust, the federal conservation status, all in black and white. "This property," I said, "has been in my family for a century. The state recognizes it as a protected watershed. And anyone collecting fees for access, that's called fraud." The crowd gasped. Brenda started shouting something about protecting the community and outsiders. Then, from the edge of the stage, Sheriff's Deputy Martinez stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "the FBI has a warrant for your arrest." The metallic snap of handcuffs echoed across the lake. Kids kept laughing in the background, splashing water, while the woman who'd terrorized the neighborhood for years was led away under the afternoon sun. I didn't gloat. I just looked out at the water, the same water my grandfather had guarded his whole life, and finally felt like I'd honored him. Brenda thought she could build an empire on lies. Turns out she built a case for her own downfall. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. It just waits quiet, patient, until the truth surfaces all on its own.